How can a city engage residents in neighborhood planning? Dan Baisden joins us on the Midwest Flourish, and he tells us change happens on the front porch. Greetings, I'm Rick Farrant, and I'm your host for the Midwest Flourish. Our guest today is Dan Baisden, who is the director of the Department of Neighborhoods for the city of Fort Wayne. Welcome, Dan.
Oh, hello. How are you?
So, interesting title, probably interesting job. What is exactly that you do?
Everything neighborhoods. And I know it's a really simple answer, but to expand upon that, neighborhood associations across the city, we have about 450 in the city of Fort Wayne. About half of those are actually active, and so we work with neighborhood associations from everything from planning to leadership development, resource distribution, community engagement, and more. So anything that has the word neighborhood attached to it, somehow I'm involved in.
Wow, I didn't realize there were that many neighborhoods. And who are the people that run these neighborhood associations? I mean, I assume they're people in the neighborhood, but how active are they? I guess it would vary, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think we have so many different layers and types of neighborhoods, from homeowners associations, HOAs, to purely civic voluntary neighborhoods. I think a couple of good examples of those is like we've got Lori Stomball, who's our neighborhood president up in the North Side neighborhood, or Chris Walker in the Bloomingdale neighborhood. And those are civic associations, and so it's 100% voluntary. Their job is to go out and recruit folks to get involved, and also talking with donors and fundraisers and grant makers and things like that. And so we have a lot of leaders across the city that are at that level. And we also have a lot of HOAs in the city too, where it's required homeowner dues that are attached to your property that pay for the necessary needs in the neighborhood.
Yeah. You employ something called embedded. It's an embedded planning approach. What exactly is that?
So embedded planning was created about a decade ago by a gentleman named Jonathan Pacheco Bell out of California. And his whole idea was to turn the way people do planning, whether it be city planning, neighborhood planning, or transit planning, kind of on its head. And instead of focusing more on top-down ideas about how we can make an improvement without a lot of community buy-in, his whole focus was how do we get the grassroots level involved, start from conversations on people's front porches, joining quinceañeras in the backyard, having conversations in the grocery store, at the coffee shop, and starting kind of a planning process or a community engagement process with one-on-one conversations with everybody.
So is that what people might find you doing? I mean, do you actually go out and sit on porches or go into grocery stores and talk to people about that?
Yeah, I say this story a lot, but there is actually one instance where I was on vacation and I happened to be driving through a neighborhood I was working with on the way home, and I saw the neighborhood president sitting on her front porch, and so I pulled off to the side of the road, parked my car, went up and talked to her for almost 4 hours on her front porch on my day off. So,
which gets to my next question. Government is not necessarily the most favorite thing among people, right? And it's not just city government, it's state government, it's federal government. I mean, people they have issues with it. So how do you build trust among residents when you walk into a place or even a grocery store and you say, I am with the city of Fort Wayne, which may not be the most warmest introduction? How do you build that trust with people in neighborhoods?
It starts with, for me, active listening. So it's having that initial conversation saying, yes, I'm with the city of Fort Wayne, but I'm not here to talk to you. I want to learn from you and listen to you. Really because you are the expert in your own neighborhood. So nobody knows your neighborhood better than you. It's where you live, where you sleep, where you walk to school or go to work from. And so first and foremost, it starts with that conversation one-on-one with the resident. And then, to follow up with building trust, it's about making small incremental projects come to life, one project at a time, and then showcasing that project was driven by the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I had some experience a number of years ago with, not in Fort Wayne, but in another area on asset-based community development, which my guess is that you've heard of that. And a lot of that is it's another embedded community kind of approach. And I did find that there was some skepticism initially when you walk into a neighborhood that you don't live in, and people kind of wonder, who is this guy and how are they really going to care about my neighborhood? Is that something that you often find when there's an initial contact?
It's always the case. Typically when we go into a neighborhood for the first time, the first question they'll ask is, well, which neighborhood do you live in? If you don't live in my neighborhood, where are you from? And so I'm honest with them. And I think part of that is building trust. You have to start with some honesty and saying, no, I don't live in your neighborhood, but I'm here to have that conversation with you to figure out what's important for you in your neighborhood. And then just showing up over and over and over again. That's super important for us. We've done a couple of projects where we may not get a lot of people coming out right away, but it's just showing up and being seen. And so people start to build trust after they see that we're repetitively in their community.
Yeah. Outside of trust, what is the biggest challenge or hurdle that you have to overcome when you're trying to do this embedded approach?
It's honestly, it's meeting people where they are. And that's really hard sometimes because especially with people moving more online, digital engagement, things like that, how do we, if you're coming home from work or you're coming home from school or whatever you might be doing that day, and you park in your garage and you walk in from your garage into your house and you never ever step foot, into the community space, the park, coffee shop at the end of the street or sitting on your front porch, it's sometimes really hard to meet people where they are because we don't know where you are.
I actually didn't, I supplied you with some initial foundational questions. I really didn't know that I would ask this, but is there any part of it that mimics the asset-based community development approach, which I used to like to say, it's not a jobs program, but it is a jobs program because what it does is it connects people within the community to other people who may be able to help them in some fashion. Do you find that happening with the embedded approach?
Really, when we look at embedded planning, we start kind of from the basis of it's about building social capital. So, which I know has a lot of definitions to it, but really the idea behind it is how do you get people connected to one another, which then builds into asset-based community development. So they work in tandem and I think overlap in a lot of ways. So you could say that we do mostly embedded planning, but we also do a lot of ABCD or asset-based community development work too.
I mean, some examples of that might be there's somebody in the community that has a special skill, and when you start, and so maybe they're good at car mechanics or something like that. And so now you know that you can go to Joe or Mary or whoever in the community if you have a problem with your car. And that's one of the outcomes that you might have from that. The work that you do in promoting strong neighborhoods, and this may sound a little squishy, right? But it really does have an impact on community development. How do you see a strong neighborhood helping in those regards?
Well, it goes back to what you said about asset-based community development. That's where we start with. If you are living in your neighborhood or you're involved in your community, you're going to start to build those relationships, whether they be strong bonding or weak ties with folks in the neighborhood. But it's having those initial conversations, which helps lead the way to open up doors for workforce development. Maybe it is, Joe the mechanic, and all of a sudden he has a job that he knows about that's open down the street at an actual, at a business he frequents. And so that conversation starts to happen. But that has to happen because you have strong, vibrant associations, because really the whole point of having an association is people working together for the common good.
I'm actually going to jump to a question that I was going to ask much later on, because we're kind of like there, but you're a good sport, and I'm sure you'll be fine with it. It seems to me that there was a time when neighborhoods organically did this stuff, and maybe not so much anymore. They've become kind of fractured. Is it possible that we could get back to a situation where neighborhoods were much more self-sustaining and much more cohesive than they have been without your help?
I always like to say my ultimate goal is to eventually work my way out of what I do. Now, hopefully that's not anytime soon. But the goal with that is how do we start to get neighborhoods to advocate for themselves, to work together, to support each other. And that's going to take a lot of time because nothing moves fast in the world of neighborhoods. It's all about small victories and small wins building on each other. But I do believe that someday we can get back to that. And we're starting to see some of that in some of our neighborhoods we're working with already. The breakdown, I think, did happen over the last 40, 50 years. Used to, people had the desire to get involved in their civic organizations. There's been a lot of work by Robert Putnam in this field with Bowling Alone and social connections and things like that. And then we saw that kind of degrade or erode over the years. And so starting to get people to realize that those relationships are the most important foundation.
What
in
are
your
the
community.
factors? What are the factors for that erosion? I mean, I could throw out a few, but what are the factors you've seen? I mean, frankly, we have neighborhoods. I'm not going to pick on Fort Wayne, but we have neighborhoods in this country where people don't know who lives at the end of their street.
Yeah.
Right. That didn't used to be the case.
And I want to say there was even a survey done a couple of years ago where most people can't even name 3 of their neighbors, which is quite alarming. So there's a lot of factors that went into that. You can have some academic scholarly research on that. Some of the things that we've seen is expansion of cities out into suburbs. So not necessarily people are walking down the street in front of 5 other houses on the same street. Instead, you have to get in your car wherever you want to go. Not saying that that's the only thing, but certainly we did see some of that happen. There's also been with just the idea of television and then the personal computer and social media and things like that. So people are less engaged individually one-on-one or having those conversations out on their front yards. Instead, they're, maybe having conversation online or arguing online. So, I think it's just a layer after layer after layer of things that have occurred in neighborhoods over the last, 40, 50 years. But then we're starting to actually see some of that turn around. More people turning off some of these devices and actually getting involved in their associations and having these conversations because they realize how important they are.
Yeah, I mean, I sound like I'm ancient, and I probably am when I say this, but, there's the old story of how people used to share sugar, right? You'd go to somebody's porch and say, hey, have you got any sugar or baking soda or whatever it is? And it feels as if that sort of thing really doesn't happen as much anymore. You mentioned just a few minutes ago about, wins. Can you talk about some of the wins that you've seen?
Well, in Fort Wayne specifically, there's a couple that I can think of. First and foremost, our team, one of our responsibilities is to help get neighborhood associations relaunched in the city. So, we have 450 or so neighborhoods. About 250 of those are actually active in the city. And so we're trying to build up more associations across the community. And so we've had a couple of great wins. Like, for example, we relaunched the Hamilton Neighborhood Association a couple of years ago, working with residents there. Also Broad River and Beacon Woods, which used to be 4 different neighborhoods. And so we're trying to work with residents where they are to help them get it reestablished as an association. So that's kind of a small but big victory for us as a department and also as a city, as we're seeing more people civically engaged.
What are the barriers in getting an association to either get renewed or started or whatever? What are some of the significant barriers that you've seen?
Human capital is always a thing because everybody is busier than we like to admit sometimes, or maybe we have adjusted our priorities, and so human capital certainly is a barrier. But the other one is financial investments in the neighborhood. So a lot of times that's just
who's financial investments?
Well, that's the big thing is, that's where the separation between civic associations and HOAs occur.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, our civic associations, they're trying to figure out how to, put in a bench or plant some landscaping at the entrance of their neighborhood. So they have to rely on donations, on grants, and things like that. And so we're trying to figure out ways where we can help associations be better at grant writing, figuring out where there's opportunities out there to find additional funding to do the projects they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, there are city grants, too, for this, right? I mean, I've seen that there are city grants, but it sounds like what you're saying is they need more than that. Yeah, they can't just rely on the city alone to make it happen.
And the goal is for them to be self-sufficient and building that list of people that they can talk to about funding projects that they want to accomplish in the neighborhood.
Yeah. And I would assume that you have to find a person, am I right, who's willing to lead the charge.
You always need somebody to start, which that's, I think of a couple of examples where we've seen that in our community. I'm going to use a good example here in the Harvester neighborhood. This is an association that's been around 100 years over by the old Harvester International plant. Gret Macklin is the president there, and she actually reached out to us when we first formed as a department here at the city and said, I want to get my neighborhood association relaunched. What's the process in getting that done? And so it was honestly a year of us working with Gret, and we still work with her today, but spending that first year going house to house, knocking on doors, having those conversations, trying to figure out who else may want to help step up and assist Gret in getting that neighborhood relaunched. But we always do have to have a kind of an initial champion to get things going.
What is the pitch that you give to reluctant residents when you're going around and you're doing that, whether you're going door to door and they're looking at you and saying, yeah, no, I'm not interested, or that will never happen. What's your pitch?
At first, so it's really hard because we could easily just walk away. Certainly it would be more time friendly to just move on to the next house if they told us no. My goal is to say, well, how many neighbors do you know on your street? If they say, well, no, well, how do you know your neighbor across the street? Do you know your neighbor next door? And if they say no, then I try to figure out the next question to ask. But it's really about how can we maybe even start at the block level? Yes, you can be a part of this great association that has 30, 40 city blocks in it, but who else do you know on your block? Because those people are the people that matter the most in improving the quality of life of the neighborhood you live.
Yeah, and imagine you'll still run into people that really don't want to have anything to do with the neighborhood, right? Yeah. That they're perfectly happy being there by themselves, and they have no interest in knowing their neighbors or being involved in some kind of organized association. I think you probably always have that, right?
We get some of those, and so we do have to move on. But if we can try, we're going to try.
So you said, I think the number was you have 450 neighborhoods. Was that the right number? And you have 200 and something associations. I'm going to assume that the ultimate goal would be to hit 450, but what is the realistic goal and what is the time frame for you?
So my initial goal was to hit all 450 in the next 5 years. That's not going to happen. Otherwise, I would not sleep at all. But I originally was like, okay, we got to set a number. But I realized I can't do that because every neighborhood is unique. And that's the one thing I love about Fort Wayne. I love a lot of things about Fort Wayne, but specifically with that is the fact that we have so many unique individual neighborhoods that all have their own challenges, their own barriers, their own goals, things they want to accomplish. And so how do we work with an association that has some things that they want to accomplish and whatever timeline it's going to take them? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, neighborhood leaders are all volunteers. And so we don't want to burn people out. We don't want to push too hard, but at the same time, we want to see some positive success and momentum and really sustainability.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have neighborhood leaders that jump in and they want to try to solve all the problems or accomplish everything they possibly can in a year, and they realize that nobody else is going to step up and take that mantle.
I want to go back just really quickly to the funding aspect that you mentioned. So we know that the city gives out grants, but we know that they have to find grants from other sources to do some of the projects that they'd like to do. Does that factor into it as a fundraising mechanism?
It depends on the HOA. Some of our HOAs have really nominal dues that they're required to pay, and it may not fund all their necessary projects that they want to get accomplished. And then some HOAs have pretty high rates.
But I mean, is it necessary for a neighborhood to have an HOA to make an association successful?
No. We've actually seen some really successful civic associations across the city that are not necessarily HOAs. I think finance is certainly an important part of things, but if you don't have the team there, if you don't have the buy-in from the residents, you can only go so far. Yeah. So you really have to have that belief that there's something greater than just yourself and working together in a collective group that supports improved quality of life.
Where does you're obviously very passionate about this. Where does your passion come from in doing this work?
Oh my gosh, where do I even start?
Anywhere you'd like.
Yeah, no, I grew up in a really small town over in East Central Ohio. And seeing at the time when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s in this community, it was you saw kind of a start of a breakdown because of the economic situation in this community. One of the big factories in the town had closed. There was some conversations about other businesses closing. And so what I realized through that process was two things happening. You saw people coming together, banding together to support each other. And then you also saw groups of families and neighbors fracturing and not coming together because they were getting more involved in whether it be moving on to another community or focused on going back for their education and not trying to lean on other people. And so you could say my earliest foundations and passion towards neighborhoods and cities started back then. But it was only fueled over years.
What was this community like that you grew up in? I mean, did it have any of the vestiges of what we think about, communities that had the mom and pop grocery store and the corner, and where kids could safely ride their bikes wherever they wanted to, and parents would say, "Get out of the house and don't come back until it's dark," and you might be given a few cents so that you could buy a Coke. Was it that kind
It
of?
was.
It wasn't really.
Although I'd say that my parents would say, don't come back till the streetlights came on, except for the fact that our town had maybe 10 streetlights. And so it was, it was an interesting day and a challenge in this community. And what you saw was just the evolution of community occurring in such a short time frame. It would have been such a, I don't want to say stagnant, but kind of run-of-the-mill community of, this is the way things work. This is the people who own the stores. And then what happened was economic kind of unnerving that occurred in the community, and it changed kind of, the long-term prospect of what was happening in the town.
Where is that town now?
I'm
not saying you don't have to name it, but I'm saying, what is the condition of that town now?
So population is decreasing in that community. It's I can say it's Shreve, Ohio, small town over near Worcester, Ohio, Canton, Ohio. But small community over in Eastern Ohio, and population is decreasing. I know that they have some new administration that's trying to turn things around, but certainly still something that I think about from the community I grew up in. And actually, that really fueled my interest in studying Rust Belt cities. Something I actually did for my master's program when I went to Penn State.
You have a background in communications and radio.
You couldn't tell?
No, I just know that you do. I did enough research to know that you do have it, but you're doing a very good job today.
Thank you.
So it must come from somewhere. How do you use that, or how does that assist you in the work that you're doing for the city of Fort Wayne? Or does it? Maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
Should I do this in my radio voice? No, I'm just kidding. I spent about 20 years actually working in radio broadcasting. I still work a little bit in radio broadcasting on the weekends here in Fort Wayne, but I spent from the year 2000 until 2015 full-time in radio broadcasting all across the country, Ohio, Kentucky, Arizona, Utah, Indiana a couple of times.
You were a nomad.
I was. Yeah. Okay. I went wherever I could get ratings.
You were a radio nomad. Yeah.
Yeah. And I worked my way up into management at the radio station, and ended up being a program director, operations manager for radio stations my last 10 of my 15 years full-time in radio. But what that taught me about communication and how I apply it to the things I do today was that communication and the factors of communication are always changing. And so, we may look at things, we can't look at things static anymore. Not everybody necessarily picks up and reads, front to back the full newspaper, or listens to an entire, 30-minute set on the radio, or things like that. And so mass media is changing. It's changing fast. How are we making sure that we're keeping up with it? And then also understanding that when it comes to, working with residents, how are we improving our forms of communication and outreach and engagement to make sure that people's voices are heard and involved in the process? And it's not necessarily the way it was in the 90s. You put out a press release and say, this is what we're doing. You have to figure out new ways to talk to residents and get things moving.
Yeah. So a lot of what you do, in my estimation, fits into the category of quality of place and quality of life, which fits into economic development, and it actually fits into workforce development. I mean, that's people are one of the things we talk about attraction. It's not just the jobs that people are attracted to. It's like, where am I going to live, right? And so this is my guess. If I'm wrong on any of this, you tell me. But my guess is that the stronger the neighborhood is, the more cohesive a neighborhood is, the more it has to offer to people, the more likely someone is to move to Fort Wayne and join one of these neighborhoods. Now, there has been considerable debate, and I think you've had experience with some of this, if not here and other places, of public art and other placemaking initiatives. I know that in some business communities, they kind of consider this puffy stuff that,
I've heard that before a few times.
Well, I'm just going to say, some think, okay, you want to attract people, so you put murals on walls. How do things like public art and other placemaking initiatives not only strengthen neighborhoods, but also just strengthen the community at large? Or do they?
So there's always the conversation about the economic tie-in. Back 6 years ago, I actually had an opportunity to work with a group and help develop the City of Fort Wayne's public art master plan called Art for All, which is really a great document if anybody gets a chance to read it. And it talks about the future of public art in Fort Wayne over the next decade. And some of the questions we initially had, from everybody in neighborhoods to the business community, is how does public art increase economic investment development in our community. And certainly you could look at it from an economic analysis standpoint of saying, well, by getting more people, going to that store, you're going to increase the number of sales and things like that. But the challenge that we had was trying to find empirical evidence to back that up. And so there's the old Millennium Park study in Chicago. But what we ended up finding out was if you can get more people walking, if you can get people feeling safer, if you can get residents feeling like they want to be more engaged in the place where they're walking to or walking through, you're more likely to get people to stick around longer, which they're going to spend more money. And so that's really that's what I would like to justify as the economic tie-in to public art and placemaking, is if you can get people to get out of their house and turn off their phone or put it in their pocket and go to a place and have a sense of wonder or get inspired by the things they see or having those conversations, that's where the economic development engine starts.
Yeah, and I would imagine that is a really difficult thing to come up with metrics for, and then therefore is difficult to justify.
It can be, but if we can measure, and there's we have some great tools at the city in which we can study and measure the number of people walking on that street or spending time in a place, lingering a little bit longer. That is where we can start to find some metrics. It is hard, and it does require a lot of research and standing there and observing and things like that. But I think that's part of what I love about the embedded planning practice that we apply, is that we have to be out in the community doing that. We can't do that from behind a desk at City Hall. So we have to be out there, and we have to be, with a clipboard marking how many people are standing in a corner for more than 5 minutes at a time.
I have a last question,
Sure.
which sounds kind of ridiculous. It's like one of these questions that people like to ask. But if you had no limitations, what is one challenge that you would like to fix when it comes to neighborhoods?
Oh my goodness, that's like the hardest question of them all.
I know, and it's the last one. If it's two challenges, I don't know, but this is kind of like a dream thing. What would you like to see?
Honestly,
it's a Pollyanna question.
Yeah. I love this. For me, it's just getting people more motivated to be civically engaged. And that can happen at any level. I think sometimes people that work in policy, they have this box of what they hope the person does. You have to fit inside, this idea of what the person can do to get engaged in their community. I would rather just see people in their front yard planting flowers, having a conversation with the neighbor across the street, figuring out how to share that cup of sugar so they can make sure they get their, cooking done that night for the family that's coming home. There's a great story of a neighbor that I could share, but in the Hamilton neighborhood, but just figuring out ways to get people more civically engaged, getting people to the polls to vote, getting people to the grocery store to make sure they can get their, groceries if they can't drive. That's where, if I could pick one thing, I just want to see more people engaged.
Well, we thank you for stopping by, Dan.
Thank you.
We'll look for more progress in the neighborhoods of Fort Wayne, and good luck as you go out there and sit on porches and talk with people.
It's my favorite thing to do. Thank you so much for this time.
You're welcome.
That's a wrap on today's episode of the Midwest Flourish podcast. Want to dig deeper or get involved? Head to marketingthemidwest.com to explore how we can work together to empower your community to flourish. Let's keep the Midwest momentum going and shape the future of our region together.